Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first workshop in our summer series with the DeKalb Reproductive Justice Campaign. My name is Naomi Destabel, and I'm the Community Outreach Manager with the Feminist Women's Health Center. And I'm joined here with my colleague, Sabrine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrine Mohammed. I'm the Manager of Health Education and Research with HEART, and I'm grateful to be here in community with Naomi doing this workshop.
So this workshop is the first in a series of presentations that we'll be offering to you all, and was really born out of a request that different community members shared with us through our needs assessment around a desire for further engagement and education based in sexual health, reproductive justice, and education. And because we are representing reproductive justice orgs within the Amplify Georgia Collaborative, we wanted to begin our first offering as a refresher and a grounding in reproductive justice. So without further ado, this is our intro to reproductive justice. Reproductive justice encompasses a few different components that are very critical to the well-being and autonomy of folks. These include reproductive health, rights, and justice. So reproductive health focuses primarily on service delivery and addressing the medical needs of folks. This includes things like preventative care, abortion access, contraception, STI and STD treatments. Medical professionals like doctors, nurses, and clinicians play a huge role in this field. My organization, the Feminist Women's Health Center, is also an abortion provider and a gynecological care provider here in Atlanta, and we also offer trans health services. We've been around since 1976 and have expanded our offerings over the years through our clinic to serve the diverse needs of our communities. And our clinic is a space where folks can come to access the needs that encompass their reproductive health, no matter where they are on the gender spectrum or no matter what their needs might be. Reproductive rights focus more so on the law, and this encompasses supporting folks defending themselves in a legal capacity, ensuring that folks have access legally to abortion care and contraception. An example of a wonderful win that we had in terms of reproductive rights was the resolution for reproductive freedom, which decriminalized abortion in DeKalb County, where our campaign advocates for and where our clinic is based. That's an example of a win on a local level. A state level win that we're working towards within the Amplify Collaborative is the Reproductive Freedom Act, which is essentially a long-term bill and goal that would decriminalize abortion access here in the state and provide that autonomy for folks to receive abortion access in a safe and equitable manner. And reproductive health and rights are both deeply interconnected. Within our work, you'll often find there are folks who wear different hats that serve perhaps in the clinic, but also come to advocate with us on the local level or join folks at the Capitol. This is because in reproductive justice, there is an understanding that our needs are interconnected. And so when we advocate in one area, we're essentially supporting advocacy in another area as well.
Thank you, Naomi, for that intro. The next few slides will kind of go into the reproductive justice from a historical perspective, and then providing a definition that we currently used within the movement space. So when we look at the history of reproductive justice, we see that with the rise of reproductive rights and reproductive rights movement, majority of the movement spaces have been predominantly occupied or predominantly serving white women, middle-class white women that had access to birth control, that had access to abortion. In that space, we often found that it lacked voices of marginalized communities. So women of Indigenous background, Black women, queer individuals, queer and trans folks that have been part of these movements at large, but have not been given the voices and the space to be visible in these movements. Also, we see that it often neglected the needs of people that are living with disabilities, and disability justice not being in this movement as a cornerstone to help advance the reproductive rights of those individuals that live with disability. So within that, we see that the reproductive justice movement was founded on those intersectional identities and founded out of that circumstances and the struggle. We see that within the reproductive justice movement, it recognizes the right to sexual expression, the right to have children, the right to not have children. I'm having tech issues. Okay, so when we define what is reproductive justice, I want to recognize that within the movement, depending on the organization that's doing the work and depending on their focus within the perspective of the work that they're doing, we find different definitions. Collectively within the movement, we recognize that, and this is the sister song definition, that reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy and have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. What does that look like, right? So when we look at the right to have children, this looks at access to reproductive health services, similar to the work that Feminist is doing, making sure that individuals have access to STI prevention, basic sexual education, prenatal services, abortion. So making sure that if you choose to have children, access to all your healthcare services. And what does that look like? The right to not have children. And this looks at having access and the right to affordable contraceptive methods, having access to educational material and supplemental material that meets your needs, but also acknowledges your cultural backgrounds, your faith connection to, and your cultural backgrounds, and what does bodily autonomy look like in those spaces. When we say within the definition of reproductive justice, the right to raise children in safe and sustainable communities, that looks like having the right and the basic human rights to live in communities that are free of violence, free of criminalization, free of state-sanctioned policing, and having access to neighborhoods that are really safe and neighborhoods that we can thrive in as people of marginalized identities and intersections, making sure that our neighborhoods are a space where we can community build, but also a space where we can play, children can walk around safely, elders can exercise, green spaces. So that is what we mean when we say the right to raise children in safe and sustainable communities. And lastly, the right to full bodily autonomy. This is the right that individuals can make choices around how they present themselves. But also this really looks at the right to sexual expression and sexual liberation. And what does that look like to meet the needs of your individual self, but also to reflect on the larger systemic injustices that a lot of individuals who are walking daily with marginalized identities experience, specifically those who are marginalized within the racial dynamic, the sexual and gender expression dynamic.
I really enjoy this visual here because it makes me think a lot about what you were just sharing, Sabrina, and what we shared at the top of the presentation around how there are different forms of justice and advocacy that encompass reproductive justice. And in the same way, there are different forms of each of our identities that will either hinder our access to care through the reproductive justice framework. And something I think a lot about are how folks might have varied identities in terms of their cultural identity or their sexual orientation identity, and how these lived experiences intersect and how folks might access care. I think about folks that we've served in our clinic, for example, who might have a language access barrier. And I'm sure through your work at Heart and advocating and serving for primarily a Muslim community, you understand that there might be a barrier that folks face within a faith community. And so when one person might have various identities that come together and result in barriers to care, that is why it's so important that we advocate on multiple levels to support folks who might otherwise fall through the cracks, who carry those intersecting identities. So when we think about bodily autonomy, just some questions to start mulling over. We think about questions that impact some of the choices that we make when it comes to our body and our life. And when I think about this question, I think that it often is presented as something big picture, but it can also be something small and minute, and it expands how we choose to show up each day, how one might dress. This impacts often how they are perceived or responded to within their environments. Some choices made for folks by the government or by the state. For example, the 6-week abortion ban for how folks can or cannot access abortion care. Some choices made by culture and religion. This can show up in a plethora of different aspects of where someone might go to access care, if someone even knows that certain care is available, or certain stigma around accessing even basic services, and some choices that folks might want to make for themselves and what that autonomy looks like. And when we think about moving from that individual level of our bodily autonomy and envisioning how stepping into the world and presenting ourselves and being treated and accessing care and having rights looks like, we can then begin to build more closely with one another and envisioning what a community and ultimately our own utopia looks like, since we know that our communities are made up of one another. And so this exercise gives us the opportunity to reflect a little bit on the area that we live in, our community and our space, what our current environment looks like, what it's missing when we step out in areas where there are food deserts. This is a reproductive justice issue. In cities where it might not be safe for children to play outside, that's also a reproductive justice issue. Where housing might not be sustainable, that's also a reproductive justice issue. When we think about the kind of services that we want to have in our city, we can think on the basic needs that need to be fulfilled. Once those are fulfilled, we can begin to imagine things that are more innovative, that are more creative, like Sabrina was mentioning earlier, environments where our elders are thriving, where there's greenery and spaciousness. And most importantly, what makes us feel safe and what makes us feel safe for our community and for those who are more vulnerable in our communities, including children.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on how thinking about like the collective community, when we step out of that bodily autonomy, one-on-one individual space, I think it's really important to recognize that within the systems that we live in today, where there's tremendous amount of policing and a lot of, whether it's direct policing or, policing among religious institutions and whatnot, I often think back about like how water is like the foundation of life, and like in a lot of communities where predominantly people of color, specifically Black and Brown folks, Indigenous American folks, water, it's a resource that is becoming less and less available, specifically when we look at Flint, Michigan. That's just an example that I'm bringing, but also when we look at a few years ago with the Dakota Access Pipeline, that has a direct impact to reproductive justice. When communities do not have access to clean, sustainable water, when communities do not have access to water that they can use on a daily basis, but also, if they consume water that's polluted, that has direct impact on, parent to child to elder. So just thinking about when we're building our safe and sustainable communities, thinking about community level things that we can control, but also structural institutional levels that is beyond our reach, that we can hopefully within the movement build around, and with our coalition building, advance and gain the rights, the human rights to those clean and sustainable communities.
Thank you for that offering, Serene. I think that water is a really powerful symbol. And also that's such a great example, right, of how that focus issue area is a part of reproductive justice. It's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So we have a quick visual here for reproductive justice and how it includes these following issue areas. Sabrine just touched us through police brutality and how this is a reproductive justice issue. We spoke a little bit about reproductive health, and that encompasses the birth control aspect. We alluded to some issue areas around cultural sensitivity and immigration, and spoke a little bit about affordable housing. Something we haven't touched on yet in our presentation is equal access to education. And we recognize that when folks have access to information and education, then they're more likely to be able to know where to find the right resources for themselves and refer their community to those same resources. And I think that we can think of all of these themes here as being interconnected with one another. And we can really start from one space and then build on the other to make sure that we can best contribute to our spaces and our community in helping tackle where there might be some gaps, because I think that in some communities there is honestly more police brutality, right? In some communities there might be more of a difficulty of access to birth control. In some communities there might be more of a cultural or religious barrier, and in other spaces each of these are equally competing with one another and how they're impacting folks.
To add to that, I really want us to think about when looking at why is this reproductive justice movement is really important. I want us to think about, yes, having children, it's definitely a personal and individual choice. It's a decision that individuals make alone or with partners in safe and sustainable communities. But it's also thinking that how that religion is rooted in that individual understanding of your needs. And grounding, but it's grounded in the need to have access to all of this in order to make healthy choices that are reflective of your needs as an individual. But furthermore, like this movement really addresses like all of this that we're talking about. And it really acknowledges that one of the foundational elements of this movement is access to comprehensive sexual education that meets the needs of all of our communities, marginalized communities, in a safe and sustainable fashion that does not leave anyone behind, right? Folks that are struggling with immigration status should have access to safe information about how to protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections, should have access to affordable housing, should have access to birth control options. So thinking about, that bodily autonomy aspect in the movement that is really rooted in understanding, yes, as an individual, you have the right to control your body and the choices you make, but within the community, we need to ensure that we're providing a comprehensive understanding of sex ed and where to get tests and where to get access to affordable birth control and, affordable housing and green space and, affordable ways to access immigration reform. And just thinking about all those things are really crucial to building a space where individuals can thrive in our communities.
Absolutely. And it's really from that place that the intention for beginning to offer these workshops came from. You all can expect, after you've reviewed our presentation, those who've connected with us through the sign-up form to receive these updates, information on where you can access birth control, abortion care, including at the Feminist Women's Health Center, other clinics that we partner and refer folks to for various health needs, immigration support in terms of pro bono support that might be available, and including some mutual aid offerings that our Lifting Latinx Voices initiative at the Feminist Women's Health Center has been offering for folks within the community, and other resources from our partners at Heart. We want folks to walk away from these presentations not only having information, but also having resources so that folks are able to make tangible changes for themselves and their community members with the information that they have, so that it empowers them.
Thank you for that offering to the community. And we just want to uplift that, the work that Feminist is doing, but the work that Heart doing. We are a national organization. Our focus is in, advancing reproductive justice. Our work is done among and in community with the most impacted Muslims, and that looks at the intersections that we've been talking about: genders, sexual expression, faith, and race, and how that shows up in individuals in our communities accessing reproductive choices and options. So we're really excited about this summer series, and we would love to hear your feedback and continue supporting our work and utilize our resources if possible.
Thank you all for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next presentation.
Thank you.